Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Ben Connolly. I have the great honor and pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Arleta Little. Arleta is the board president of Common Ground Meditation Center, the executive and artistic director of the Loft Literary Center. She's written for many periodicals, including Lion's Roar magazine. Is the co-author of the book Hope in the Struggle, which is a book about the pioneering Minnesota civil rights activist Josie Johnson. And also Black Swallowtail is a book which combines the poetry that Arleta has written with the images, paintings, I believe, by Tacumba T. Aiken in the African tradition of call and response. So I've known Arleta for quite a few years because I've been able to follow her leadership with the BIPOC Sanghas for Direct Action, which would bring meditation practice into locations of social justice activism, which has been inspiring work for me. And also she graced our presence here for a weekend once when we were hosting the Minnesota Intersangha Ethics and Leadership Summit. And I've just always deeply enjoyed your joyful, steady presence. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much, Arleta.
And thank you so much for that generous introduction. I was sharing with Ben that years ago, I used to live on Bryan Avenue, not too far from here, and I would come here to the Minnesota Zen Center in the early mornings and sit actually before this room was finished in the room across the hall. And then I'd walk around the lake and before my day began. And then I moved over to Longfellow neighborhood, and I primarily practice at Common Ground now. I was introduced to meditation as a Peace Corps volunteer serving in Thailand in my 20s. Thailand is the Theravada tradition. And I happened to retreat at a place that I now understand to be like the mothership of the Thai forest tradition. My very first meditation retreat was at Wat Suan Mok, which is in the northeast in forest land of Thailand. So I'm very happy to be here with you all this morning. There's a lot to talk about, especially happening in the news. Thoughts with the families and folks in LA and the fires, considerations related to Israel and Hamas and the ceasefire, release of hostages, inauguration tomorrow, and something I don't want to be overshadowed, the celebration of Martin Luther King Jr., which will be most relevant to my sharings with you today. Let me check in just with the folks online. If somebody could just wave. Okay, great. All right, we're good. Wonderful. You know, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was a Baptist minister, an African-American civil rights leader here. He was also a nonviolent activist and was struck down at the age of 39 in 1968. This year also marks the 60th anniversary of the March to Selma, from Selma to Montgomery, which took place in March of 1965. There were actually 3 marches. The first one was cut short prematurely and really became known as Bloody Sunday. This is a march that was truncated when state troopers and a mob really charged the nearly 600 participants who were unarmed. They were tear gassed and beaten with batons. But a couple days later, that march was joined by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and they embarked on a second march. And that march was interrupted when a federal court issued an injunction against further marches. A couple of weeks later, there was a third march, and this march involved thousands of people who successfully made it to the steps of the Alabama State Capitol and did a protest at the Capitol. Martin Luther King made a speech there. And all of these marches were nonviolent. Protests of segregation and racial injustice as part of the struggle for civil rights that ultimately contributed to the passing of the Voting Rights Act. So this morning here in Minneapolis, the struggle for the recognition of the humanity and the rights of Black people in the United States and in our city continues, really in the discussions that we're having around community safety and the work of police reform. All of this following the murder of George Floyd 5 years ago and the protests that erupted here in our city and around the world, continuing the call for racial justice. Now, I participated with several folks in this room, as Ben mentioned earlier, in a multiracial coalition of meditation practitioners from Sanghas from all over the Twin Cities. It was really a beautiful unity, and we participated in nonviolent sits and marches for racial justice and compassionate action in the days following, the days, months, and years really following the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police officers. So as my offering this morning, I'd like to invite you to join me on a guided walking meditation of George Floyd Square. Now, how many of you have been to George Floyd Square? The majority. So we're going back today. I call this Footnotes, a guided meditation at George Floyd Square. And I'll start just with a brief overview to ground this year, 2025, will be the 5th anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. So just grounding. Following the murder of George Perry Floyd Jr., a 46-year-old unarmed Black man by Minneapolis police officers on May 25th, 2020, the 2 blocks surrounding the intersection of 38th Street and Chicago Avenue in South Minneapolis became known as George Floyd Square, a site of protest, a memorial for George Floyd, and a locus for grief and remembrance of the many victims of police and racial violence. In the 5 years since, many community members have worked hard to hold the space as a place of memory, of creative expression, of collective outrage, of public grief, and of rememory. Rememory is a term that was really made popular by Toni Morrison in her celebrated novel, Beloved. And it speaks to an articulation of reconnection with memory, especially painful or difficult memories, and an expansion or reimagining of a story to allow for the emergence of a broader application, a more significant understanding of its meaning. So this is an invitation to a walking meditation, a way of bringing our attention to our bodies and to our experience in the present moment as we move mindfully through space. I invite you, if you want, to close your eyes, to journey with me as you will, to make an offering of your breath. I'll offer prompts and ask questions and make notes as we walk along in the space, but always connecting with our breathing. Let's begin by approaching George Floyd Square from the east and inviting ancestors to join us in this walk. An alley mural on our right bears the images of Angela Davis, Huey P. Newton, Marcus Garvey, Madam C.J. Walker, Dick Gregory, and Malcolm X under the statement, "Give me a place to stand, and I shall move the earth." Draw in a deep breath and let it out slowly. Let's bring our awareness to the weight of our bodies as we inhabit this space. Consider, who has reminded us of our value as human beings? Who has seeded in us a vision for a better world? And who taught us how to fight for it? Let's take a moment just to offer gratitude for our teachers, for those who struggle and have struggled for justice in this and prior generations. Slowly draw in another breath and let it out. We continue walking towards the brown fish sculpture in the middle of the street. There is a black, red, and green flag on the top, recognizing the solidarity of the peoples of the African diaspora. Land Back is printed on its yellow base, recognizing the call and movement to restore broken treaties and stolen lands to the Dakota, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Ho-Chunk, and other indigenous peoples of this place. Let's pause to feel the weight of our bodies pressing through our feet into the street, to the land, to Mother Earth. We are standing on native land. Let's offer gratitude to the many generations of people who have and continue to steward this land. Recognizing the interconnected struggles of all oppressed peoples. Those suffering from slavery as stolen labor, and genocide for stolen land, past and present, here and around the world. Draw in a deep breath and let it out slowly. Let's walk forward, entering George Perry Floyd Square, also known as the Free State of George Floyd. Civil rights activist Medgar Evers said that freedom has never been free. Even the Buddha, with the Four Noble Truths, recognizes suffering as a reality, the truth of the origin of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and then also the truth of the path to the cessation of suffering. So let's consider, what privileges do we have because others worked and sacrificed before us? who has helped us to gain understanding and skills to navigate this world. Those teachings that serve us now and will serve us into the future. Draw in a deep breath and let it out slowly. Let's offer gratitude for the many hands that have prepared us for this moment. Many people, known and unknown to us, who have lived, who have taught, who have died, so that we may have a better life. Ahead of us, in the middle of the intersection, we see another brown metal fist surrounded by plantings and lawn signs, portraits of Black poets and politicians, including Amanda Gorman and Stacey Abrams, interspersed with lawn sign portraits of Black people who have been killed by police, including George Floyd, Amir Locke, and Breonna Taylor. Over our left shoulders, painted on the old Dragon Walk building, are murals calling out to abolish police, to heal, invest, uplift our community. Notice our bodies as we receive these words. Where is their intention? Consider that the origins of modern-day policing in the US are rooted in the use of slave patrols, whose tactics often included the use of excessive force and acts of terror designed to engender fear in Black people, to establish and maintain a system of control that empowered and enriched white slave owners in particular, and white people for generations to come. Consider, how can our community create experiences of safety and protection that are not fundamentally rooted in anti-Blackness? What imagination and what resources are necessary to create systems of safety that honor and protect the lives of Black people and all members of our community? Slowly draw in a breath and let it out. Movements for social change often proceed through stages that are spurred on by triggering events. They feel cyclical and involve activists playing different roles like citizen, rebel, change maker, reformer. These are working in the streets and neighborhoods, in formal and informal organizations, and in local, regional, and national government. Take a moment to offer gratitude for the many community members in various roles who continue to work to bring about changes in our approach to community safety and who labor to create the beloved community. How can our practice contribute to this work in progress? As we approach the crossroads, all manner of fresh, dried plastic and fabric flowers overflow milk crates and vases in various colors along the sidewalk to our left. Potted plants are lined up supporting propped up teddy bears and other stuffed animals that are crowded together around the pots. Handwritten and hand-painted signs express outrage, grief, and resilience, and call repeatedly for justice. Just beyond the entrance to Cup Foods, the place where George Floyd was handcuffed and pinned face down in the street, is cordoned off with stanchion posts, red rope, and concrete blocks. This is where Officer Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's neck, and Officers J. Alexander Kung and Thomas Lane pressed on his chest and legs while he moaned, called out more than 16 times that he could not breathe, cried for his mother, expressed fear of imminent death, and lost consciousness. Let's tune into our feelings. Can we name what is coming up for us now? Take a deep breath. Inhale and slowly exhale. Do we feel differently about our breath? About our ability to breathe? Death by strangulation and police brutality activate memories of lynchings and racial terrorism that persist in the bodies of many African Americans today. These memories have passed from one generation to the next and are reinforced by continuing acts of violence and systemic oppression. Let's stay with our feelings. George Floyd Square is a place for creative expression, for collective outrage, for public grief. Now, we'll turn to the west, towards the People's Way, an old gas station repurposed by the community and now used as a space for gathering, planning, resting, conversing, storytelling, and organizing. The canopy reads, "Where there's people, there's power." There is a library shed on one side and a closet for free clothes and supplies on the other. Today, perhaps in the back, some folks are hitting a pickleball back and forth while a couple replaces the tire on a car. The bus shelter in front offers community information and has posted photographs of Black freedom fighters, including Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. Beside the bus shelter is a world map where visitors to the square have push pins to mark their homes. The multicolored pins cover the continents. There is also a small stage for announcements and performances in front of the People's Way. In addition to protests, many community gatherings, celebrations, and performances have taken place over the years at George Floyd Square. And it continues. Slowly draw in a deep breath and release it. Let's continue to walk around the large concrete pyramid blocks, which have been painted black, and spell out the words Black History in red, yellow, and green letters. Now we see a gigantic black and white mural, the soulful specter of George Floyd's face, affixed to a bus shelter and looking out over the street. There is a bench in front of this mural and more memorial flowers, stuffed animals, and potted plants. Paintings, streamers, banners, and flags are strung from the bus shelter over and behind the stanchions and back to the corner. On the brick wall behind the shelter is a painting of a Sankofa bird perched within a burning heart, with its feet faced forward and its neck craning back. The egg of wisdom for the future is in the bird's beak. Now down Chicago Avenue, past a small greenhouse, is the Chicago Fire Arts Center, where hundreds of handmade paper signs, cardboard placards, small paintings, and other items have been left by the surge and flow of visitors to George Floyd Square over the months and years since his death. In the lobby of the center, still here, unstolen, unbroken, reads the sign below a plexiglass case holding photographs of the circle of George Floyd Square, surrounded by candles and dried flowers. Let's offer a breath. Walking on, continuing north on Chicago Avenue. We take in the smell of barbecue from the Smoke in the Pit restaurant. People coming and going from Setul, where workers organize, educate, and empower each other. Now we notice that the street is painted with names, and they extend into the distance, nearly to the end of the block. Let's cross to the center of the street and walk up the middle of the road, making an offering of our breath by saying each name aloud. I will read the list. Justice for Tyrone R. Williams, Darian Barnhill, Nico Smith, Ershawn Warren, Dante Jordan, Hori Kanash, Thomas Purdy, Eric Rivera, Kamoni Davis, Adesha Miller, Michael Barrera, Kasharm Burney, Terrence Coleman, Santino Trevino, Antonio Guzman Loren, Cortez DeMarco Buford, Devontae Art Emanuel, Kobe DeMock Heisler, Hakeem Littleton, Jacarius Jaquan Flint, Dana Fletcher, Jordan Love Gonzalez, Charlie Salinas, Jamarian Robinson, Ryan Gipp Jr., Justice Howell, Travis Jordan, Tori Robinson, Nathaniel Pickett, Vermeen Vincent Vanez, Francisco Villanueva, Andre Kierce, David Joseph, Wendell Clestine Androni, Scott, Darius Wimberly, Sandy Guardiola, Amir Brooks, James Rivera Jr., Antiana Jeffers, Darnisha Harris, Alicia Thomas, Miriam Carey, Taisha Miller, Kendra James, Corinne Gaines, Oscar Grant III, Melissa Williams, Kevin Hicks, Sean Monterosa, Thurman Levins, Ayanna Stanley Jones, Gasher View, Richard Brooks, Robert Wilson, Robert Fletcher, Christopher Davis, Andres Guardado, Marcus Golden, Chavez Carter, John Fairbanks Sr., Cody Ayer, Tony May Jr., Vernon May, Adrian Eagle Elk, Clarence Leading Fighter, Bodie Phelps, Khalif Broder, Keith Watkins, Elijah McLean, Arvell Williams, Theodore Bobo, Miguel Espinal, Jonathan Tubby, Raymond Akrit, Mikelo Sanchez Manua, Johnny Bonta, Billy Hughes, DePicciat, Jason Perro, Kyler Grabbing Bear, J. Scott Wadmark, Adam Poorbear, Gabrielle Sage Barnes, Raina Renville, Tammy Braveheart, Ramon Guzman, Paul Castaway, India Kager, Tyree Crawford, Alonzo Smith, Anthony Ashford, Dominic Hutchinson, Patterson Brown, Lamontis Jones, Junior Prosper, Keith Harrison McLeod, Felix Kumi, Ashams Farrow Manley, Roy Robinson, Christian Taylor, Brian Keith Day, Michael Sabi, Samuel DeBose, Shali Tilson, Tyrese West, Dante Shannon, Billy Ray Davis, Darius Stewart, Albert Joseph Davis, Salvado Ellswood, Joseph Mann, Freddie Blue, Jonathan Sanders, Victor Manuel LaRosa, Brendan Glenn, Alexia Christian, William Chapman II, Eric Hari, Maya Hill, Philip White, Tony Robinson, Tony McDade, David McGatty, Anthony Hill, Natasha McKenna, Frank Smart, Jerame Reed, Fong Lee, Isak Aiden, Matthew Ajabadi, Romaine Brisbane, Tanisha Anderson, Michelle Cusseau, Akai Gurley, George Mann, Giselle Nelson, Dante Parker, Ezell Ford, Phil Quinn, Cordell Handy, Fu Lee, Albert Abuka Sanders, Nakia Moody, Larry Jackson Jr., Devon Bailey, Darius Farver, Ariane McCree, Sean Reed, Anton Wote, Anton Rose, Stefan Clark, Terrence Franklin, Stephen DeMarco Taylor, John Crawford II, Trayvon Martin, Walter Scott, Brian Quinones, Laquan McDonald, Michael Brown, Ralph Bell, Freddie Gray, Alton Sterling, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, Jamar Clark, George Floyd. Let's take one final deep inhale. As you exhale, honor the many others who have needlessly lost their lives to police brutality and racial violence since the death of George Floyd, here and around the world. The contemplative theologian Howard Thurman eulogized Martin Luther King Jr. by saying, "The time and place of a man's life on earth is the time and place of his body. But the meaning, the significance of a man's life is as vast, as creative, as redemptive as his gifts, his time, and the passionate commitment of all his powers can make it." Consider, what can we learn here about Black history, about American history, and also about the significance of the times in which we are living, our historical context? How can what we are learning be useful to what comes next for us individually and for participation in community collectively? As we continue down the block, exiting George Floyd Square, consider, how can we honor the life of George Floyd and the other victims of police and racial violence with our words and our deeds? How can we serve as attentive witnesses, making meaning for, with, and on behalf of one another as we walk this path? Peace be. Thank you for journeying with me. I am happy to open it up to reflections, comments on your experience, questions, although I can't guarantee answers. Yes.
Thank you for that wonderful guidance invitation. That was powerful. Dave Johnson, I live in the San Antonio Village. Connected to Florence too. I recently was meeting after the election. I was having a lot of darkness tendencies, and I needed to pull out of that. So I took up a book of collected sermons by Dr. King, and it was called On Love, and it spoke about, well, he insisted throughout all of his sermons about the power of love, and connected to the Baptist Christian tradition. He, he followed the teachings of Jesus Christ, and I think one of the most powerful things that Jesus taught that was revolutionary was to love your enemies. And so when you asked who our teachers were, actually the first name that came to mind was Derek Chauvin. And it seems ironic or backwards to say that, but when you consider what Jesus said, I think it's not backwards. Dr. King talked about, when he spoke about the struggle for civil rights, he spoke that you need to love the people who are fighting against you. And he realized that that sounded weak, it sounds physically weak to do that, but he insisted that it was spiritually aggressive. And he spoke of a young woman in exact story. She was a college-age young woman, and she basically told him, "I'm ready to lay down my life for this cause, because people are dying. You know, if we do nothing, people will continue to die." So that's just some of the things I've been thinking about since since I've
Thank you for that offering.
Thank you so much for that. And you know, this enables me to touch many important things. And one thing that happens for me at some point is I think I want to engage in some kind of activity outside of this building to dismantle these harmful things. And there's so many things you could do. And I just wonder if you could speak to like discerning, you know, where to direct one's personal energy. Because yeah, there's so many aspects to racism and racialized violence, and then even other struggles. So
thank you for that question about where we might direct our personal energies and how to discern where we can get involved and how. The meditation that I offered, I've been thinking a lot about how I can do more with the time that I have. I am a writer, I meditate, I am an activist. And so I've been playing with my practice, combining all those things. Thinking about what are the gifts, what are the interests and talents that you have personally. So me as a writer, I love to write. I am interested in this particular work in community. And I'm also so grateful for my meditation practice. So the idea of actually writing about a cause that was of interest to me, the death of George Floyd, the work we did in meditation and practice on site, and then offering that as a meditative opportunity, as a meditative experience. That's something I've been working with. Like, how can I combine the things that make me me and provoke my practice and put me in community all at one time. So that could be an interesting koan. Like, what is that? What ways combine those practices that I have most efficiently?
thank you.
Yes.
Well, I don't mean to be really concrete here in response to your koan, but I am a retired social worker, and in the last couple of years, I've gotten really involved on the north side, particularly with a group of Black women who are doing amazing work over there around domestic violence. And recently, we decided to try to create a consortium or an alliance, because these women are doing all this incredibly heavy lifting, trying to meet the needs of these individual women who are in really challenging, scary, life-threatening circumstances, and they are helping each other find resources. They're doing amazing work, but they're incredibly underfunded. So we're trying to figure out, we're on the road to trying to create an alliance, a consortium, so we can start to really fundraise. The funding for domestic violence is down considerably in the last year in Minnesota. 2 shelters have closed. So that does not bode well for any woman or child. So if anybody's interested and wants to help, what I've also found are these women are, not just women, people on the north side are incredibly receptive and open to help. So if you want to help, You can come and give me your name and email address, and I will put you on a list, so.
Thank you for that offer.
Kelly online has a chat question for you, if I can read it.
Please.
Kelly says, I have a lot of anger and outrage and sadness right now about the continued racism and the backtracking of our country's rights for minorities as this new movement gains strength with the incoming administration. What do you do with your outrage and anger and sadness due to social injustice?
I sit, I write, I gather in community. I do what seems to be the best appropriate action at the time. I work at a nonprofit organization. I do the best I can through my work, but I also organize as a citizen, gathering with people in my community to talk through our frustrations. And I exercise. But I will say in terms of sequencing self-care, care in relationships, care in community, I think we can't give what we don't have. So self-care first.
Hi, I'm online, Deb.
Hi, Deb.
Here's my question for you, and thank you so much for your talk. I went to George Floyd Center once, but I was so overwhelmed with emotion, I haven't been back because it was just too difficult. But my question is, when we push back for the rights of Blacks, indigenous population, transgender, it seems like a certain element of the white dominant group gets their hackles up and then really squashes or really wants to like annihilate all of those efforts. Do you have any comments about that? Like how to avoid that threatening people who can't take differences or whatever?
I think you're making an accurate observation in how movements progress. They are not linear in one direction. They are oftentimes cyclical, spiral in shape. And sometimes we lose ground. Thus the need to continue our efforts.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Ahmed. I was just going to offer additional things to Kelly's question, which you have answered. Just don't watch movies. And listen to music also, but you covered a lot of it, so I appreciate that. So that's all. Thank you.
How do you think Buddhist practice or meditation practice informs leadership?
I think so. I think leadership involves a lot of challenge. Maybe it always has, but it feels especially in these times. And in my experience, my meditation practice allows me to stay with difficulty without losing hope. And in a similar way that very literally in Zen practice, you may meditate looking at a wall. I often in leadership feel like we are looking at walls, but needing to imagine openings. And my meditation practice provides me with the spaciousness for new possibilities to enter. That's been my experience. I call it jazz. Yeah. I was telling Ben, there were so many, I actually wrote a complete other talk for this morning. And it was going to be a reflection on the koan, Bring Me the Rhinoceros. Another answer to your question, flowing out of that koan is that we learn to dance with the rhinoceros, you know, rather than the difficulty.
How to navigate with the feeling of empathy. I usually have this conflicted dialogue inside me because I cannot stop to feel empathy for those people, those teachers, how it was mentioned, or those people that doing something that I know it's wrong. I need to feel rejected and no hate, but like, this is my enemies, this is my friends. Good, clear line. Okay, let's do this. I cannot. I all the time have I feel empathy. I feel empathy for all this party. I feel empathy for all this party. Blue, red. It's pain in your heart, and it's pain in your heart, and you did this because it's pain in your heart. No, Vanessa, you don't need to be empathy for this because this is wrong. It's a constant in my heart, and I don't know how to navigate it. Sometimes when I share it, people say, "Oh, you just need to pick a side," and just I was like, no, I'm gonna clear my side. I cannot stop to feel this in my heart of empathy for everything and all that. So how I can navigate this conflicted?
Yeah, I'm not gonna. So I'm gonna have to talk about the Buddha for that, because the truth of suffering. To recognize the truth of suffering, that everyone is suffering, is a doorway to empathy.
Can I offer something? I think this all kind of comes to the fact that everybody needs some sort of healing. I think holistic healing is what, I prefer to see that come to me. So that's what I would like to.
I also had an offering in response to that. Another thing that Dr. King said was, hate the evil system of people.
Sometimes what helps me is I think about how scared people must be if they're thinking they say they're thinking as they express themselves. I think this is coming from a place of incredible fear, unnamed fear. That helps me.
I think a lot about how, like, I think humanity or the human spirit is like one thing. So I think any conflict, like with another person or any wrong done by another person is like a wrong done to yourself or like a conflict within. So I also think whenever people do wrong, to use that for self-reflection of like, we're all the same thing. So if I'm noticing somebody else doing this, like, what do I do? Or what part of me is connected to that?
Can I build on that one also? The assumption that we share a humanity is not a given. Actually, the way in which we are able to do such harm to one another is by dehumanizing each other. So the extent to which we recognize that within ourselves can also help us to relate to those that are doing that to us. Yes.
Got a problem with my girlfriends. You know I'm going to work with you. But I like to support everyone that I can. I've been supporting a school in Thailand where I originally taught English. And sometimes I give them several $100 a month. And it costs just $400 to pay the whole staff of the school, but I no longer can afford it. And I'm about to become busier because after I finish my 4 more weeks of training as a VA counselor, I won't have a lot of time to other things. So I'm gonna have to gradually work out to get rest, time with my wife, and not feel afraid of letting things go. I've also been supporting people in Ukraine. Some of them are my friends. And my wife is Jewish, and so we're both very concerned about Israel. And I volunteered in every continent except Africa. There's so much I want to do. That's it. Suggestions?
Any suggestions?
Arleta, I actually think maybe you should offer some final word because we should.
This is why we practice. This is why we practice.
Thank you so much, Arleta, for this beautiful offering, for all that you've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Announcements.